Donald Houston is a professor of regional economics and an associate at the UK in a Changing Europe think tank. And Joe De Silva owns a hospitality business in Inverness. Good morning to both of you. Thanks for being with us on the Sunday show. Professor Houston, let me come to you first. Can you just give us an overview to kind of frame this discussion then on the situation with immigration and figures in the UK and specifically also here in Scotland? What's the distinction?
Good morning. A lot's been happening in the labour market since Brexit and since COVID. Scotland has always struggled a little bit with population compared to the rest of the UK, particularly England. So this is an acute issue for Scotland. Scotland does attract a smaller share of immigration compared to England in particular, particularly London and some of the other large English cities. So Scotland does struggle with population and the size of the workforce, and so on one hand, Scotland has been slightly less exposed in some ways to changes to the immigration system, simply because there are fewer migrant workers in Scotland than the rest of the UK. But Scotland's ageing population and its lower population density, making it more difficult to attract and retain workers in certain areas, particularly the North West Highlands, have been very badly hit in shrinking workforce since the pandemic, leave it quite exposed. So what we've really had in the mix alongside Brexit and changes to immigration is a bit of a perfect storm in the labour market. So since COVID, we've seen really a significant increase in ill health amongst the working age population, some of whom are still in work, requiring support and flexibility from employers, and others have moved out of the workforce altogether. We've also had the tail end of the baby boomers moving into retirement age, and that has shrunk the workforce, and that process will continue for another few years across the whole of the UK and in Scotland. And plus, of course, Brexit and the immigration issues that you outlined at the beginning. So we've had a real perfect storm in terms of a shrinking workforce since 2019 in particular, but since the Brexit referendum back in 2016, immigration from the EU, which we in some parts of Scotland and the rest of the UK had become very dependent upon, the growth in that really stopped, and since then it shrunk slightly.
Right.
So we've got this new... Sorry.
No, I was going to say, so those demographic issues you're highlighting, the fact that the boomer generation is kind of finishing work and so, is there a way to solve this without increasing immigration, or is that absolutely where it starts and ends here in Scotland?
I think in the short to medium run, it's difficult to see how current labour shortages can be tackled without immigration. But I think we need to see this in the broader context of the economy and the labour market. And yes, in Scotland and the UK, we need to have more sensible political debates about immigration, and that is thankfully starting to happen. But we also need to have a sensible debate about the labour market and the economy and what sort of levels of pay and conditions we expect to see in lower paying sectors in hospitality and agriculture in particular, so that we can understand when and where we might need immigration, and when and where we might be able to do better at training and recruiting and attracting a wider range of people to some of these sectors.